Lyra stepped through the airlock of Harmony Station, her blue-tinted fingers clutching her research bag tightly. The journey from Eridani Prime had taken 3 weeks in stasis, but now she was finally here, the first orbital research facility jointly operated by humans and her people. Her antennae twitched slightly, a sign of nervousness in her species. "Please proceed to decontamination," announced an automated voice. The scanner bathed her in soft purple light. Eridani physiology was still novel to human systems, and the extra precautions were necessary. Lyra didn't mind. Her people were meticulous about biological safety too. Through the transparent walls, she observed humans moving efficiently through the station corridors. They were shorter than Eridani, with their round ears and varied skin tones. Fascinating creatures. Their technology had developed in completely different directions than her species, making this collaboration valuable to both worlds. After decontamination, a station officer escorted her to the residential section. "Your quarters are in Blue Sector, with the other research personnel," he explained, speaking slowly as if unsure of her grasp of human language. "Thank you. My translator implant functions perfectly," Lyra said, touching the small device behind her ear. "I studied human speech patterns for 3 years." The officer looked embarrassed. "Of course. Sorry about that." Her room was smaller than she expected but functional. A viewport offered a stunning view of Earth below, its swirling clouds and blue oceans mesmerizing. Eridani was a drier world, with vast purple plains and smaller oceans. She'd seen images of Earth, but the reality was breathtaking. The station communicator chimed. "Science Specialist Lyra, please report to Laboratory 6 for orientation at 900 hours. Sleep came uneasily that night. The station's gravity was calibrated to Earth standard, making her feel slightly heavier than normal. When morning came, she dressed in her formal research attire, a simple white jumpsuit with Eridani science insignia. Laboratory 6 was on the station's outer ring. When she entered, a human male was arranging equipment on a workbench. He looked up and smiled. "You must be Lyra. I'm Dr. Jin, head of biochemistry." He approached with his hand extended. Lyra had practiced this greeting. She carefully took his hand and moved it up and down 3 times, as was customary. "I am honored to meet you, Dr. Jin. I look forward to our collaborative research." Jin's handshake was firm but gentle. Eridani's skin was more sensitive than human skin, and she appreciated his care. "Pleased, just Jin is fine. We're pretty informal here." She noticed his features were different from the station officers, his eyes shaped differently, his hair black and straight. Humans had such variety, unlike the uniform appearance of her people. "Let me show you around our lab," Jin said, guiding her through the facility. "We're focusing on cross-species medical applications. Your expertise in biotechnology will be invaluable." The laboratory was impressive, with equipment she recognized and some unfamiliar human devices. Jin explained each station patiently, occasionally asking about Eridani equivalents. "Your species has made remarkable advances in cellular regeneration," Jin noted, "while we focused more on pharmaceutical approaches." "Different evolutionary paths lead to different solutions," Lyra replied. "That's why this exchange is so important." Their first 2 days passed quickly, establishing research protocols and reviewing previous findings. Lyra found Jin to be knowledgeable and respectful, never displaying the superiority some humans exhibited toward other species. He listened to her ideas carefully and offered thoughtful responses. On the 3rd day, something changed. Lyra noticed the laboratory felt warmer when she arrived. "Environmental controls are acting up again," Jin explained, looking annoyed. "Engineering says it's a calibration issue with the thermal regulators. Should be fixed by tomorrow." As the morning progressed, the temperature continued rising. Lyra noticed moisture appearing on Jin's forehead. Eridani didn't perspire like humans, regulating temperature differently. "I apologize for the heat," Jin said, removing his white lab coat and rolling up the sleeves of his shirt. "This keeps happening in this section." "It's tolerable," Lyra assured him, though the heat was making her uncomfortable too. They continued their work analyzing protein structures that might bridge the gap between their species' different cellular compositions. Jin moved around the lab, gathering samples, his movements causing more perspiration to form on his skin. Lyra had read about human sweating but had never been in close proximity to it before. Eridani had extremely limited olfactory senses, barely able to detect even strong chemical compounds. It was considered their greatest evolutionary disadvantage. "Could you examine this sample?" Jin asked, placing a slide under the microscope. As Lyra leaned forward, Jin reached across to adjust the focus, bringing his arm near her face. A bead of sweat trickled down his neck. Without realizing it, Lyra inhaled microscopic particles of his perspiration. The reaction was instant and overwhelming. Her limbs began to tremble uncontrollably. Her vision suddenly sharpened, colors becoming more vivid and detailed than she'd ever experienced. Her heart raced like she'd been running, and strange warmth spread through her chest. Disoriented, she stumbled backward, knocking over a tray of equipment. Glass containers shattered on the floor. "Lyra." Jin rushed to her side, concern etched on his face. "Are you all right?" She tried to answer but couldn't control her muscles properly. Her hands shook violently, and her legs felt weak. The room seemed to spin around her. "I don't know what's happening," she finally managed to whisper. Her voice sounded strange even to her own ears, higher and shakier than normal. Jin helped her to a chair. "You're trembling. Should I call medical?" Lyra wanted to say yes, but something stopped her. The sensations coursing through her body were frightening, but also fascinating. She could suddenly hear the subtle hum of equipment she'd never noticed before. The colors of the lab seemed to pulse with new intensity. "Just give me a moment," she gasped. Something triggered a reaction. Jin grabbed a scanner and ran it over her. "Your heart rate is elevated, and there's unusual neural activity. This isn't normal for Eridani physiology, is it?" "No," she admitted. "Nothing like this has ever happened to me before." As Jin moved closer to check her pupils, another wave of sensation washed over her. This time, she recognized the trigger, something in his scent, in the microscopic particles coming from his skin. With shocking clarity, Lyra realized the truth. Something about human biochemistry was affecting her in ways nobody could have predicted. Her body was responding to compounds her species had never encountered in their evolutionary history. And somehow, she knew this was just the beginning. Lyra sat in her quarters, staring at her reflection in the small mirror. Her normally pale blue skin had taken on a subtle purple tint, especially around her neck and wrists. She touched her face gently, noticing how even that small contact sent waves of heightened sensation through her fingertips. It had been 3 days since the incident in the laboratory, and she hadn't told anyone the full truth. She pulled up her sleeve, revealing the strange markings that had appeared overnight, faint lines that seemed to track her circulatory system. They glowed slightly in the dim light. "Computer, reduce lighting by 50%, she whispered. The sudden brightness hurt her eyes. Another new development. Her previously moderate vision had become painfully sharp, registering details she had never noticed before. The station communicator chimed, making her jump. "Science specialist Lyra, Dr. Jin is requesting laboratory access confirmation." She hesitated. Every time she was near Jin, the symptoms intensified. Yesterday, she'd nearly collapsed when he accidentally brushed against her arm. But avoiding him would raise questions she wasn't ready to answer. "Confirm access," she replied, then quickly added, "Inform Dr. Jin I'll be delayed by 30 minutes. Lyra opened her personal medical kit and removed a vial of standard Eridani stabilizing serum. It wasn't designed for whatever was happening to her, but it might dull the symptoms temporarily. She pressed the injector against her arm and winced as the cool liquid entered her bloodstream. In the laboratory, Jin was already working when she arrived. He looked up and smiled. "Morning, Lyra. Feeling better today?" "Much improved, thank you," she lied, keeping her distance. The serum was helping, but his presence still made her heart race. Good. I was worried after what happened. He turned back to his work. I've been reviewing our initial protocols. I wonder if we missed something in the environmental compatibility assessments. Lyra focused on her workstation, trying to ignore the heightened awareness of Jin's location. She could hear his heartbeat from across the room. Steady and strong, slightly faster than an Eridani heart. The assessments were thorough, she said carefully. This is likely just an adjustment period. Throughout the morning, she managed to maintain the appearance of normalcy, though it took tremendous effort. The serum wore off gradually, and by midday, the symptoms were returning full force. Strange energy coursed through her limbs, making it difficult to perform delicate laboratory tasks. That night, the dreams came again. Vivid images of Earth landscapes she had never seen, sensations she couldn't name. And throughout it all, a strange calling that pulled at her consciousness. She woke drenched in a fluid that Eridani never produced, something like human sweat. Alarmed, she finally arranged to visit the medical bay. Dr. Hana was the station's xenophysician, specially trained in multiple species biology. She ran a comprehensive scan while Lyra described her symptoms, carefully omitting any mention of their connection to Jin. These readings make no sense, Dr. Hana said, frowning at the display. Your neurological pathways are showing activity in areas that should be dormant in Eridani physiology. Lyra watched the doctor's face. Is it dangerous? I'm not sure, Hana admitted. These patterns don't match any known Eridani medical condition. When did symptoms first appear? 3 days ago, during the laboratory temperature malfunction. Dr. Hana made notes. Any other triggers you've noticed? Lyra hesitated. Nothing specific. The doctor looked unconvinced, but didn't press. I'm going to run more detailed cellular analysis. In the meantime, I'm placing you on light duty. No laboratory work until we understand what's happening. Later that afternoon, Lyra sat in the station's observation lounge, watching Earth rotate below. The restriction from lab work meant avoiding Jin, which brought both relief and a strange sense of loss. Mind if I join you? She turned to find Jin standing nearby, holding 2 cups of what humans call tea. Her body immediately responded, senses sharpening painfully. I heard Dr. Hana put you on medical restriction, he said, sitting down and offering her one of the cups. I was concerned. Thank you, she said, carefully taking the cup without touching his fingers. It's just precautionary. Jin studied her face. I've been reviewing your medical data. You have access to my medical records? Lyra asked, surprised. Dr. Hana consulted me as your research partner. She thought I might have insights given our work together. He paused. Lyra, I noticed something interesting. Your symptoms started the same day as the environmental malfunction. She stiffened. Coincidence, perhaps. Maybe. Jin took a sip of his tea. But I have a theory. Could it be something in human biochemistry affecting you? The directness of his question caught her off guard. What makes you think that? The pattern of your reactions. They seem to correlate with proximity to humans, particularly me. Before she could respond, the station alarm blared. Warning. Oxygen pressure dropping in Corridor C. All personnel evacuate immediately. People around them began moving quickly toward the emergency shelters. Jin stood. That's near the main life support junction, if that system fails. Lyra didn't hear the rest of his sentence. A strange sensation washed over her, a kind of knowing that transcended normal perception. She could suddenly visualize the station's oxygen distribution network, could somehow sense exactly where the rupture was occurring before the system had even fully registered it. Without thinking, she bolted from the observation lounge, moving with a speed that left Jin calling after her in confusion. Her body felt light, powerful, responding with precision she had never possessed before. She reached Corridor C as emergency barriers began to close. Technicians were running in the opposite direction, shouting for her to turn back. But Lyra could see what they couldn't. exactly where the line had ruptured, and how to stop it. Sliding under a descending barrier, she reached the junction box where oxygen was hissing from a damaged connector. With strength she shouldn't have possessed, she forced the manual override valve, sealing the section before the automatic systems had even pinpointed the location. When she turned around, Jin was standing there, having somehow followed her through the emergency barriers. His face showed astonishment. "How did you move so fast?" he asked when the all-clear signal sounded minutes later. "That was impossible. You reached this section before the emergency teams even mobilized." Lyra looked at her hands, still tingling with strange energy. The truth could no longer be hidden. "I saw it happening before it happened," she admitted quietly. "My body just knew what to do." Jin stepped closer, his expression a mixture of scientific curiosity and genuine concern. "Lyra, whatever is happening to you, it's beyond anything we've seen in cross-species interaction. You need to tell me everything." She nodded slowly, realizing the time for secrets had passed. Whatever was transforming her body wasn't stopping, and Jin might be her only chance of understanding it before it completely overtook her. The laboratory had been converted into what looked more like a medical quarantine unit. Lyra sat in the center, surrounded by monitoring equipment. Dr. Hana and Jin stood behind a transparent barrier, watching as the station director reviewed their findings. "Explain this again," Director Kwon said, her expression serious as she studied the data displays. "In simple terms." Dr. Hana pointed to the molecular structure rotating on the main screen. "These compounds in human perspiration are triggering evolutionary dormant pathways in her body. It's as if her DNA is being rewritten." "Rewritten?" The director frowned. "Is it harmful?" Jin stepped forward. "Not harmful in the conventional sense. Her body is changing, but it's not degenerating, just the opposite. Her systems are becoming more efficient, more adaptive." Through the barrier, Lyra could hear every word despite their lowered voices. Her hearing had become extraordinarily acute in the past week. She could now detect conversations 3 rooms away if she concentrated. "Can it spread to other Eridani?" the director asked. "We don't know yet," Dr. Hana admitted. "Initial tests suggest the reaction may be unique to Lyra's specific genetic makeup, but we can't be certain." Lyra watched their faces, able to detect subtle changes in their expressions that would have been invisible to her before. The director was afraid. Jin was fascinated. Dr. Hana was professionally concerned but scientifically intrigued. "We need to inform the Eridani delegation," Director Kwon decided. Within hours, news of Lyra's condition spread throughout the station. The other 5 Eridani scientists aboard Harmony Station demanded an emergency meeting, which Lyra attended via video link from her quarantine room. Chief Scientist Moru, the senior Eridani representative, spoke first. "This situation presents unacceptable risk. We request immediate isolation of all Eridani personnel from human contact pending further investigation." "I'm not contagious," Lyra protested. "Dr. Hana's tests confirm that." "We cannot know that with certainty," another scientist argued. This reaction was unforeseen. What else might we have missed? Lyra watched her people's faces on the screen. Their fear was obvious, but there was something else too: disgust. They were looking at her as if she had become something unnatural. After the meeting, Director Kwon implemented new protocols. Humans and Eridani would work in separate sections of the station until further notice. Lyra herself remained in quarantine, allowed visits only from medical staff in protective gear. 3 days into her isolation, Lyra woke to find Jin standing in her room, without any protective equipment. "You shouldn't be here," she said, sitting up quickly. "How did you bypass security?" Jin smiled. "I have access to the medical systems. I temporarily looped the surveillance feed. That's against regulations. So is keeping you imprisoned when you haven't done anything wrong." He sat on the edge of her bed. "How are you feeling?" "Different." Lyra looked down at her hands, which now showed faint luminescent patterns under the skin. "Stronger. Clearer. It's hard to explain." Jin nodded. I've been reviewing your latest test results. The changes are accelerating, but stabilizing at the same time. Your body is adapting to the new pathways. My people are afraid of me now, she said quietly. Fear of the unknown is universal. Jin hesitated. Would you be willing to come with me? There's something I want to show you. I'm under quarantine. I know a way around the sensors, just for an hour. Lyra knew she should refuse, but after days of isolation, the thought of leaving her room was too tempting. Where? Storage Bay 12. It's unused since the last supply transfer. No one will look for us there. 20 minutes later, they slipped through the maintenance corridors, avoiding the main hallways where they might be seen. Lyra was surprised at how easy it was to move silently now, her body perfectly balanced and aware. Storage Bay 12 was dim and cool, filled with empty shipping containers waiting for the next Earth transport. Jin sealed the door behind them and turned on a single light. I've been doing my own research, he said, activating a portable computer terminal. Outside the official channels. Why risk your position? Lyra asked. Because they're asking the wrong questions. They're so focused on whether this is dangerous that they're missing the bigger picture. He brought up a series of genetic comparisons. Look at this, the dormant pathways in your DNA that are being activated. They have similarities to ancient human genetic material. Lyra studied the display. That's impossible. Our species evolved on planets light years apart. That's what everyone believes, Jin agreed. But what if that's not the complete story? What if somehow our species are connected in ways we haven't discovered yet? Before Lyra could respond, they heard voices outside the storage bay. Someone was approaching. We need to hide, Jin whispered. Lyra pointed to the storage containers stacked against the far wall. Up there. We'll never make it in time, Jin said. Those containers are 3 meters high. Without thinking, Lyra grabbed his arm and jumped. To her surprise, and Jin's obvious shock, they landed atop the containers smoothly and silently. She had carried them both 3 meters into the air with what felt like minimal effort. How did you? Jin began, his eyes wide. Lyra was equally stunned. I didn't know I could do that. Below, a maintenance crew entered briefly, checked something on a panel, and left without looking up. When they were gone, Lyra and Jin remained on the containers. They're treating you like you're dangerous, Jin said quietly. Am I? She asked, suddenly serious. Jin considered her question carefully. I don't think so, but you're certainly not the same person who arrived on this station. No. Whatever's happening to me, it feels right. She looked around, then spotted a damaged cargo loader nearby. Walking to the edge of the container, she reached down and lifted the 200-kilogram machine with one hand. This should require mechanical assistance. Jin watched in amazement as she set it down gently. Your strength has increased tenfold at least. And that's not all. She picked up his tablet and began solving the complex equations he had been working on. Her fingers moved across the screen at blinding speed, completing calculations that would have taken most computers several minutes. Finished, she said, handing it back. The answer to your stability problem is to introduce a phosphorus buffer in the 3rd stage. Jin checked her work, his expression growing more amazed. Your body is adapting to human biochemical signatures, he theorized. But why? What evolutionary advantage would Eridani gain from exposure to humans? Lyra looked at her glowing hands, feeling the strange new power flowing through her. Perhaps our species were meant to meet, she suggested. Perhaps this isn't an accident, but a reunion. A reunion, Jin repeated. You think our species have encountered each other before? I don't know, Lyra admitted, but these dormant pathways had to come from somewhere. They feel ancient, like they've been waiting to be awakened. Jin was silent for a moment, contemplating the implications. If you're right, this could change everything we believe about interstellar development. If I'm right, Lyra said, it means neither of our species is what we thought we were. A sudden alarm blared through the station, Cutting their conversation short, the overhead lights switched to emergency red. "Warning. Critical system failure detected," announced the station eye. "All personnel report to emergency stations." Lyra turned to Jin, her newly enhanced senses already detecting something the station systems were only beginning to register. "Something's wrong with the reactor containment field," she said, somehow able to feel the disruption through the station structure itself. "We need to go now." As they raced toward the door, Lyra realized that whatever she was becoming might be the only thing that could save the station, if they would let her try. Lyra and Jin ran through corridors filled with frightened people. The station shuddered again, more violently this time. Overhead panels crashed down, narrowly missing a group of technicians. "What's happening?" a young human researcher cried out as they passed. No one had a clear answer. The station's primary power had failed without warning, plunging everything into darkness before emergency systems activated. Now, red warning lights pulsed in every corridor. "Reactor containment is failing," announced the station eye in its calm, emotionless voice. "Evacuation protocols initiated. All personnel proceed to escape pods immediately." The announcement triggered fresh panic. People pushed and shoved, trying to move faster through the narrow passageways. "This doesn't make sense," Jin said, pulling Lyra into a side corridor to avoid being separated in the crowd. "The reactor has multiple failsafes. They can't all fail at once unless someone wanted them to fail," Lyra finished. Her enhanced senses were picking up unusual patterns in the station's power fluctuations. This wasn't a random malfunction. They reached the main junction where corridors split toward different sections. Director Kwon stood there, directing traffic with several security officers. "Jin, Lyra." The director spotted them. "Engineering needs help. The automated containment reset has failed completely." Another violent shake threw several people to the floor. Somewhere in the distance, they heard the frightening sound of metal tearing. "Structural integrity compromised in Section D7, reported the AI. "Sealing emergency bulkheads." Jin gripped Lyra's arm. "The escape pods can't hold everyone," he said grimly. "There are over 300 people aboard, but the emergency system was designed for a maximum crew of 250. Lyra closed her eyes, focusing her enhanced awareness. She could almost see the station's systems like a glowing map in her mind. "The manual override might work," she said suddenly. "If we can reactivate the containment field from the auxiliary control room." "That's impossible," Director Kwon interrupted. "The auxiliary control is in a radiation-flooded section. The cooling leak happened there first. No one could survive the exposure." "I can," Lyra replied with absolute certainty. "My cellular structure has changed. I can withstand it long enough." The director stared at her. "You can't know that." "Actually, she might be right," Jin said. "Her cells have developed remarkable regenerative properties. The radiation might harm her, but not before she could complete the override." Director Kwon hesitated, looking between them and the crowds of frightened people. "Even if you could survive it, how would you get there?" "The direct routes are blocked by emergency bulkheads." "There's a maintenance shaft network," Lyra said. "I can sense the station's layout now. I know a path." "This is crazy," the director muttered, but desperation won out. "Go. We'll hold the evacuation as long as possible." Jin grabbed emergency equipment from a nearby locker: breathing masks, flashlights, and basic tools. "I'm coming with you." "The radiation," Lyra began. "I'll stay back from the worst areas," Jin insisted. "But you'll need help getting through the sealed sections." They moved against the flow of evacuating personnel, drawing confused and frightened looks. The maintenance access was behind a panel near the science labs. Jin pried it open, revealing a narrow tunnel barely big enough for them to crawl through. "Ladies first," he said with a grim smile. Lyra entered the shaft, her heightened senses guiding her through the dark spaces. She could feel the station's structural weaknesses, somehow predicting where the next failure might occur. Twice she stopped Jin, just before a section collapsed behind them. "How do you know?" he asked after she pulled him back from a junction seconds before it depressurized. "I can feel it," she explained, like vibrations traveling through the structure before it actually fails. They reached a vertical shaft leading down toward the reactor level. As they descended, Lyra's skin began to tingle with the first traces of radiation. "We're getting closer to the damaged section," she warned. "The radiation levels will be lethal for you soon." Jin checked his handheld monitor. "You're right. We're already at dangerous levels. How do you feel?" "Fine," she said, surprised to realize it was true. Her body seemed to be absorbing the radiation without immediate harm. "It's like energy flowing through me. Not comfortable, but not harmful yet." They reached a heavy door marked with radiation warnings. Beyond it lay the auxiliary control room, and radiation levels that would kill a human in minutes. "This is where we separate," Lyra said firmly. "The control panel is 20 meters inside. I need to reach it and initiate the manual sequence." Jin handed her the tools. "Be careful. Even with your adaptations, there must be a limit." Lyra nodded, suddenly unsure what to say. This might be the last time they spoke if her confidence in her new abilities was misplaced. "If I don't make it back." "You will," Jin said firmly. He surprised her by quickly pressing his lips to her forehead, a human gesture of affection she'd read about but never experienced. "Go save us all." The door hissed open, and Lyra stepped through. Immediately, warning alarms on her suit screamed about the radiation levels. She ignored them and moved forward. The auxiliary control room was bathed in eerie blue light from exposed reactor coolant. The air shimmered with radiation. Lyra moved carefully toward the main console, feeling the energy burning through her protective clothing and into her skin. It hurt, but she could endure it. Her cells were already working to repair the damage as quickly as it occurred. She reached the panel and began the override sequence. As she worked, something caught her eye. Damaged wiring near the primary control circuits. Looking closer, she saw the cuts were clean and precise. These wires hadn't failed naturally. "Sabotage," she whispered, understanding flooding through her. Someone had deliberately caused this disaster. The override sequence was complex, requiring precise timing between multiple systems. With her enhanced cognitive abilities, Lyra completed steps that would normally require a team of engineers. Her fingers flew across the controls, rerouting power and reestablishing the containment parameters. As she worked, the radiation exposure intensified. Her skin began to glow faintly blue, her body absorbing energy at an alarming rate. Pain spread through her limbs, but she pushed through it, knowing she was the station's only hope. With a final command, she activated the emergency restart. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, the primary lights flickered on. The station stopped shaking. "Containment field reestablished," announced the AI. "Emergency status downgraded." Lyra slumped against the console, her body radiating soft blue light. The damage had been significant, but she could feel her cells already working to heal. She turned back toward the door, each step requiring immense effort. Jin was waiting just outside, his face lighting up when he saw her. "You did it, but you're glowing. Are you all right?" "I'll recover," she managed, before collapsing into his arms. When Lyra woke in the medical bay 12 hours later, Dr. Hana was studying her vital signs with fascination. "Welcome back, hero." Jin appeared beside her, looking tired but relieved. "The entire station is talking about what you did." "The sabotage," Lyra said, trying to sit up. "Did they?" "They found them," Jin confirmed. "A small faction of extremists, both human and Eridani, who feared what closer relations between our species might bring. They thought destroying the station would end the collaboration." Dr. Hana ran a scanner over Lyra's body. "Your genetic structure has stabilized," she informed her. "The changes appear permanent and beneficial. The radiation exposure would have killed any human or unmodified Eridani, but your body used it somehow, integrated it into your new cellular structure. What happens now? Lyra asked. Now, said Director Kwan, entering the room, we learn from what happened, both the sabotage and your remarkable transformation. Research over the following weeks revealed something astonishing. Traces in ancient Eridani DNA suggested their species might have evolved similar adaptations naturally over thousands of years. Human biochemistry had simply accelerated the process dramatically. 1 month later, Lyra stood with Jin in the observation deck, watching Earth rotate below them. The station had been repaired, and new security measures implemented. More importantly, a new research initiative had been established to study the unexpected compatibility between their species. You've become a bridge between our species, Jin told her, his hand resting lightly on hers. The first, but not the last. Not just me, Lyra replied. The research shows other Eridani will adapt similarly with proper exposure protocols. We've discovered our species' next evolutionary step. Jin smiled, and all because of a little sweat. Lyra laughed, no longer embarrassed by her initial reaction. Sometimes the most important scientific discoveries happen by accident. Beyond the viewport, stars gleamed with new possibility as two species discovered they were more compatible than anyone had imagined. Whatever ancient connection had once existed between humans and Eridani was being rediscovered, promising a future neither could have achieved alone. Lyra's skin still glowed faintly in darkness, a permanent reminder of her transformation. But what once frightened her now filled her with hope. She was the first of many who would bridge the biological gap between their worlds. What do you think happens next? Jin asked. I don't know, Lyra admitted. But for the first time, I think both our species will face it together. The end.